Brothers and sisters.
Is that you, Daniel? Are you before me?
Call that radio.
You call that radio.
Hello, yes, this is Dog.
This is You Call That Radio. No, it's no. No, it's no. It's You Call That Politics. And this is part of a new weekly show on You Call That Radio TV, where we will be discussing the politics of the day. We're going to try and steer away from the nasty political party stuff that goes on. And we just want to talk about issues, basically. We've got my guest co-host here, Jim Monaghan. I'll just bring you on.
How's it going?
Jim, just to kind of like clarify for people who are wondering what's going on here today. What can people expect today and for the next 4 weeks?
What we're going to do is we're going to have a kind of alternative look at the elections, not too serious, hopefully away from all the party propaganda and the name calling and the point scoring. And we're going to have a guest artist or comedian every week that will look over the politics in a less than serious manner. And then, but we will have a serious discussion every week on an issue of policy that we hope that we can have a discussion that's just about the real issues and what can be done, rather than what party's doing this or what party's not doing that, and just concentrating what, if we as individuals, what we think needs to be done. And a little bit of fun and maybe some games as well.
That is the biggest issue. I think that's why I've never got into party politics. I'm not affiliated with any party whatsoever. The thing that really annoys me is that I think that nobody seems to like have an actual debate. It's like someone comes up with if one side comes up with a good idea, then the other side just go out their way to say it's a shite idea. And that's why I hate it. Also, I hate when someone has an affair, but if you're connected to the party, you're like, oh, let's wait until we hear all the evidence before we make any judgments. But if the opposing party has an affair or any kind of scandal at all, then we always jump down the neck of the opposing party. This is why I hate it. It's almost like it's the same with football as well. If you've got a club that you support, then you're just going to support them through thick and thin. And as a result, it is just pretty much a whole bunch of grown adults arguing like...
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like that. One that always stuck in my mind was in the Scottish Parliament, way back when it was the Labour and Lib Dems that were in control. The franchise came up for the Calmac, and the SNP at the time were saying you should nationalise this. You shouldn't put it out to private tender and all that stuff. And Labour said, "Oh, we can't do that because of the EU rules." And then, like 6 years later, when the SNP are in power and the franchise came up, Labour were saying you should nationalise this. You shouldn't get to tender. And SNP were saying, "Oh, we can't do that because of EU rules." And it just and I remember both of them more or less saying the exact opposite of what they said 6 years before. And that kind of just what you said there. If your rival party says something, you're automatically disagreeing with them. Instead of, it'd be great sometimes that if somebody came up in Parliament and other parties went, "Oh, aye, that's a good idea. Let's just do that." That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it?
You see it all the time. I mean, it's a problem in society in general, because obviously right now, when people were dying of COVID, people were saying, did they die of COVID or with COVID? And now when someone dies of a blood clot from a vaccine, it's like, did they die of vaccine or with vaccine? And society is filled with all these hypocrisies. We're going to try and cut all that shit out. I've got lots of people who tell me to turn my mic up. I have turned my mic up. Good evening, Alan. Your microphone's a bit low. Okay, Alan, I've turned it up. Can you turn your mic up? Mickey Mouse, I have turned it up. Ethan Trump says Paul. Becky says turn your mic up. Is that okay now for everyone before we get started? Are we ready? Is my microphone the right level? Sorry, I was recording earlier on today. Also, want to just give a wee shout out to the audio podcast that's out now, featuring Neil the Wee Man Bratchpiece. It's available on Spotify, Apple, and all that. It was a year in the making, that one. We have been neglecting the audio podcast, but it's back, so check that out. And this is all the stuff we've got coming up later on. I'll talk about that later on. Let's just bring on our special guest, our first special guest of the week. And I think we can go live. I think she's in the green room just now. So just give us a little second, and we will be bringing on the award-winning and very funny Susie McCabe. Yes, hello. We hope you... Hello, Susie.
Yes, she is.
How are you?
Very good to see you, pal.
Aye, good to see you, man. Listen, nearly there, nearly in the way out.
I was actually wanting to add, Mark, before we move on and speak to Susie, that for anyone who's listening in or watching in, we have a wee bit of competition going. I want you to fill in this in the comments. We're asking you to come up with your best Scottish constituency band name, like the Partick Monkeys or Jesus and Mary Hill or something like that. You can't have the Partick Monkeys because I've already said it, and it is an actual real band, Partick Monkeys. So if you can come up with anything that's based on the Scottish constituency, it's a band name, let us know.
We are live and interactive tonight, and I've actually got a You Call That Radio t-shirt we'll give away tonight to someone who gets the funniest band name. So we're looking for a constituency. You can't use Partick Monkeys, and you can't use Jesus and Mary Hill yet either. So, but good luck with that, and you can win a You Call That Radio t-shirt tonight. I'm just going to sort of take a step back and let you guys talk. I'll be here if you need me. Good to see you, Susie. And also, I think you're the only live act I think I've seen in 2020 in an Indian takeaway in a back garden, and it was a great night. Yes, Nakadar Grill.
Best. Or is it's called, which I found out, right? It's the Nakoda. Can you believe that? That's one of the most controversial things I found out in 2020. I was like, no, mate.
I'm shocked. Nakadar Grill. Nakadar Grill.
Nakadar sounds much better.
Amazing stuff. It was an amazing set, Susie, and well done for still finding a way to bring the comedy to people. And also a quick plug for those shows that you're doing at Room 2, the comedy. Get the plug out the way as well.
So I've got a virtual comedy cellar where I am the host, and for the next over 5 weeks left, you can join in. It's a tenner for a household, and you can YouTube stream it, where we can see you on Zoom. And you will be on our interactive screen, and we can talk to you and all that. It's amazing. It's brilliant. Full green screen studio. Oh, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So it's great fun.
I'm actually excited to play it for the first time. My band's playing it on, I think I might have a wee flare for that, on the 30th of April. We just announced it last night, and it's our first, Jackal Trade's first full band gig since 2018. So looking forward to that.
Brilliant. No,
anyway, guys, I'm going to let you get on with it. This is You Call That Politics.
Hello, mate.
Susie, okay, how's it going? How you doing?
It's going all right, pal. It's going all right.
Have you been enjoying the election? Has it been exciting?
Mate, after an election, like I honestly, it's like, you know, like when people get excited about football tournaments, I get excited. I'm like, oh, love it. I love everything about it. Like, even just, like this morning I was in the car and I had the radio on, and it was Good Morning Scotland, because I always kind of listen to just see what's been happening because of the way the world's been. And Douglas Ross was on it, and then my mate texts me, like, listen to Call K, Douglas Ross is on it till 10 o'clock, man. And I try and catch as much as it is possible and really take as much in as possible, because it's great.
Douglas Ross must be a favourite of you. You being a Celtic fan and him being a referee, he must be right up your street.
Mate, he's a linesman. He's a linesman.
He's a linesman. He's not a real ref.
Not even a referee. Who grows up? This is what I want to know, right? I can understand that you maybe go into politics later in life and you've maybe had a career, like I think Nicola Sturgeon was a lawyer and then became, you know, a politician and stuff like that. And I get that. I understand that. But who grows up wanting to be a linesman?
I know. It's quite sad, isn't it? Really. And a Tory and a linesman.
Tory linesman, like, there are boxes I can tick for people to hate me because do you know what I mean? Just, he's the worst, man. Do you know the thing, right? I was saying this to my mate. We'll just get the Tory stuff out the way, right? Because I was saying this to my mate. See, Davidson, as a gay woman, right? I always find people who are gay Tories, I kind of go, what? Right? I don't understand it, but each to their own, right? But especially if you're my generation and older, do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, no. You know the truth, right? And you know what happened, and you should know better. But at the end of the day, people are allowed their opinion. And Davidson, as much as what I was never a big fan, she could do her job. And I thought, you know, given that she didn't really have a massive kind of opposition, I thought she'd try to do a good job to hold the government to account. And see, at the end of the day, regardless of who's in opposition, whether I would vote for them or no, that's what I expect them to do. That's the bare minimum. And I don't want a one-party state. I understand why we've currently got that situation, but I always want a kind of strong opposition, regardless of who it is, to hold the government of the day to account. And the Ruth factor has gone, because a lot of people...
Yeah.
And that's how your Annie Wells get a seat. Nobody voted for Annie Wells. She's my mistake. There's another gay Tory in Shettleston. I mean, on what level is that work, right? But you're sitting and you're going to yourself, Annie Wells wasn't the person who won that seat in the same sense that you could say an SNP politician wasn't the person who won that seat. They got that seat because of Nicola Sturgeon. Do you know what I mean? And I look at Douglas Ross and I'm like that. Oh, mate, I just think
it's quite. I don't understand. I mean, they must. I can't remember how many MSPs have got. 20 odd.
Aye.
Now, out of 20 odd, that's their best one. I mean, what is it? What is it the Tories are looking at? You know, that they think that this is a good idea.
Do you know the bit that would concern me if I was a Tory, right? See if he gets hit with a bus tomorrow. Who's going to step into his shoes? Oliver Mundell?
Oh yeah, of course, aye. But at least he's got a dad, isn't he? You know what I mean? That's kind of a bit. You know what I mean?
Aye.
Kind of the Tories are a bit of a. They're not going to go away. There was a time I think back, and I can't remember what election it was when they got reduced to one seat, but probably kind of during the kind of Blair years. One seat in Scotland, and the big thing then was let's get rid of them and there'll be no more Tories. But they've come, you know.
Was it 2012? 2012 Scottish election. There was more pandas than Tories.
Aye. It was the UK election, I think it was, the
general
Scottish
election. Aye.
And it was kind of but they've bounced back, you know. I mean, and not just Ruth Davidson, Annabelle Goldie was quite kind of popular, and all that as well. So they've kind of. I think we've just got to realise that there are, for some reason, there's like about a quarter of our population who are actually Tories for some reason.
I think it's from that whole Scottish middle class Calvinistic Presbyterian that's just ingrained in Scottish society. Once you kind of leave the West Coast, you know, you really kind of see it and it's visible. It's not a bad thing. It's not. You know, we're not talking DUP or anything here, you know. I mean, I think it's just...
It is.
Well, it's a bit like, you know, when you look at John Swinney's bookcase, and you look at John Swinney's bookcase and you think, you could leave politics and be a minister, man. It's like hundreds of books in Scotland and then right in the middle's like the James VI Bible. You're like, you know, you've got the hint of a minister about you, haven't you? He's got the hint of a kind of standing at the kirk on a Sunday morning, kind of, you know. I think
a lot of them are like that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of politicians have got that kind of.
Aye, I would say so. I think
we've got a wee delay there. I think a lot of them are. When you go,
I never heard you. A lot of them are like that. I think there is a lot of them like that. I
On
think.
you go. Just I wasn't asking anything.
All right. I think there is that thing that they are a bit like that, and I think that's probably just the class system. And whether we like to admit it or no, ultimately, you're part of Britain, so you have the class system. Do you know what I mean? It's we can't get away from it, really. In fact, it was quite funny. I done a gig in Norway, 2019, and I was doing a gig with a London-based comic, young guy, really arty. Parents, mum was an artist, dad was a creative of sorts. Can't remember what he done. Grew up, real kind of middle class, creative household, and we were in Oslo, and we were getting was it Oslo? I can't remember. We were getting a connecting flight, and he goes, "Yeah, the gig's meant to be really nice. I think it's like a really nice middle class gig." And I just looked at him and I went, I don't think they have the middle class here, mate. And he was like, "What do you mean?" Like, I don't think they have a middle class. And he was like, "No, you know what I mean?" And I was like, "No, they don't have middle class. Like, they'll have like super wealthy, everybody else, and there'll be some poverty, but there won't be people below the bracket. Like, there'll be poor people, but not poor by British standards." And I said, "Because it's a class system." And I tried to explain to him that in Scandinavian countries, they have this thing with the tax where, because they all pay so much tax, but they all get so much out of it, it's a real badge of honour for you to pay in.
Absolutely, yeah.
For you to pay in that a kind of real chunk of your gold. That's me in the top tax band. I'm doing my bit for getting where I got to. And that is a massive cultural shift from claiming for a duck pond. Much can I write off? You know what I mean? My dad was in the Panama Papers. Do you know what I mean? It's a cultural shift. And he couldn't get his head round the class thing. And it fascinates me that someone brought up like that, younger than me, in a house full of creatives, cannot understand that the classism doesn't really exist out with our culture and maybe like Australia. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. I was like, if you go to
very much so.
They don't have a class.
The Scandinavian countries are kind of, I mean, they're known for, they're the most equal countries.
Yeah.
But it's also, you can look at the research for equality and say that the most equal countries, the ones with a less differential between the richest and poorest, also have the best record on things like mental health, crime, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So kind of inequality hurts everybody, including the richest. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing. And the Scandinavians worked that out quite a wee while ago. It's not that big a thing. In Britain, we still have this real resistance to the idea of like chipping in a few quid to help everybody else. Really, I mean, we'll do it on a crowdfunder.
Which amazes me. You see, like people like down south, like obviously when times are normal and I'm gigging, I can be sat in a green room in Cardiff, I could be sat in a green room in Aberdeen or Edinburgh, and I could be sitting with a multitude, especially at the Fringe, like a multitude of nationalities, right? And you'll be talking about some of the English comics and not particularly the northern guys, but they'll be like, "Yeah, but you pay more tax up here," and I'm like, "Yeah, man, like we get free prescriptions, and I don't really need a free prescription, but it's nice to know that it's there if I did." And my mum and dad get free prescriptions, and that's fine because they've paid in since they were 15. So, and like the whole kind of free travel, I was having this discussion with someone who was older, going, I see the kids up to the age of 19 are getting free travel, and I try to explain to them that if you've got an apprenticeship, but you can't afford to get to college or get to uni, but you stay in Stirling, but you're doing medicine at Glasgow because you're really bright, that's what's going to get you through that. And
absolutely.
It's not just about Wayne's jumping on those buses in the inner circle line.
Even that's good, because if young people can get a boot, that's good for everything, good for the economy. They can get more involved in things. If you're sitting in a town like Kilmarnock or something like that, and there's no money, if it's like a £5 to Glasgow in the bus, then that stops you getting up. But if you can jump in the bus and go to Glasgow and you've got a lot more options with things, you know, and I think it's a good thing. I'm only 2 years away from the bus pass, by the way.
I can't believe it.
So,
Can't believe it.
I can't wait for it. See, as soon as I get that bus pass, I'm off. Every day I'm off. I'll be having a bar lunch in Oban and then just coming back the same day.
That's what my gran used to do on their pal up to Oban, fish tea back down the road again.
That's what I'll be doing. I'll bet your butt. I phoned my ma once and she wasn't in, so the next day I phoned her back. I said, "We were yesterday." She's doing in Cumnock. She's like, "I went to visit your Aunt Agnes in Lochgelly." I thought, like 3 buses, didn't matter though, just bus pass, here we go, Lochgelly.
Do it, get a couple of pieces, you know. I think that's it, you know, and I think it's that kind of, that's what you want, you know. You want that equality, social equality, and everything just to be a bit better, you know. And I was having a bit of discussion on Twitter the other night, and there's a boy that I've known that I work with, and he's, I swear to God, see if the SNP went out and covered the streets with gold, he'd be like, "Ah, it's fake gold," right? Wouldn't matter what they done. He just hates them, right? And that's fair enough.
Gold.
Aye, you know, he's just like, it just doesn't matter, right? And he's like, independence won't be the land of milk and honey. And I went, no, 100% it won't be. And I know your position, and I know my position. And there's this guy who he talks to and I talk to on his Twitter, and we've ended up becoming kind of Twitter pals. And I kind of put this point across saying, I don't know if that'll be the answer. If independence is the way forward. I said, I don't know. I said, because I've not got a crystal ball. And I said, and I don't know if federalism's the answer. And this guy made a great point saying, I think changing the voting system for Westminster would be part of the answer. And I went, great point. Not going to happen. We did have the referendum in 2015, but it's a great point. And I said to him, I don't know. I said, but I know this. The 3 things that define the Union from 1707, whenever it was, right, have gone. You know, Protestantism, empire and war no longer are the 3 things that bond us. I said, so I'm just at a point where I go, I just don't think this is working anymore. And I kind of go, and my mate was like, but what if you end up with a Scottish Tory government? I went, well, at least they will have been voted for by the country. Do you know? And I was like, at least...
That's the thing.
At least there's not going to be a democratic deficit. At least they're going to be voted in by the people of the country. I said, see if I woke up the day after independence and the SNP had disbanded and they no longer existed and they went back to maybe what you could class as the true political homes, you know? I said, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I said, because there's an element of me that needs to hold my nose to vote for the SNP. You know? I said, there's a big element of me that has to do that. I said, but I also then have the argument of going, I never left Labour. Labour left me, you know? And I'm going, but one day I'll go back to Labour.
I mean, a lot of people have said that. I mean, you and I in the past did... You and I in the past did Labour Party gigs together. We both kind of fell out with them since. But I mean, back in the day, it made sense. And it'll make sense again because parties politically, of course,
teams,
there'll be a time and a place.
They need to shed their skin. They need to go through a cycle. They need to, you know, they need to lose the pinnacle at the top of the pyramid to. They need to leave, and then the party needs to be in a bit of a mess, and then it'll come through it again, you know. And the party will find its kind of political place at that point in time. Like Blair found his place, whether we liked it or no. Blair found his place. Just now, I feel as if Boris has moved to the right, wiped out the UKIP thing, and Labour are now moving to the right. And I'm like, no. Because they're so anti-left and so anti-Corbyn that you're going, this is the worst thing you could possibly do. So now you're sitting going, what's my options here? What's my options? You know?
Can understand that.
It's really, really difficult. And then I've got like...
What's your highlights of it? Anything stuck out of the election campaign so far? I mean, what about Alex Salmond Party. What are you thinking about them?
So we need to talk about how many yellow jackets does Nicola Sturgeon have, right? Who's got that amount of yellow jackets? Fair play.
She was cutting about Govan Hill yesterday with a bright yellow coat on. It looked great. It looked really nice.
I tell you, man, she's got sass. She's got sass. The Belgian salmon. There's something. I would never say I was a big, massive salmon fan. But there's something really tragic about him, Jim. And he's lost the glint, and he's lost the charisma, and he's lost the sparkle that made him salmon. And there's something about kind of knowing when your time's up and exiting stage left, just go and take your place in history as being the man who took us to that point. And if he hadn't done that, we maybe wouldn't be at this point, and history will be kinder to him than the present. And then with all this that came out, and the thing that really galled me was he still no apologised to those women. He came out and he said, what I'd done was wrong, what I'd done wasn't right, and it was inappropriate, but also it wasn't criminal. And that's not something... Just because what you done wasn't criminal doesn't mean to say it's all right. You know what I mean?
Aye. It's a bit like all the tax avoiders and all that. Oh, it was all within the rules. It might have been within the rules, but you're still a dick.
Exactly. It's like it's morally wrong. Do you know?
Aye.
And it's not that I'm sitting here with a big moral compass as the arbiter of all things that should be right. I'm no. But if you're standing for a political party, and then there's the whole Russian thing, and then the other night when he's like that, what? Putin involved in Trump? No. Wild. And you're just like, mate, what? And then we've got Galloway. That man, I mean, it's pure ego, and I don't want to sound like a kind of drum banging feminist here, right? But women wouldn't behave like this. And do you know what? Women wouldn't be allowed to behave like this.
Yeah, they'd be slaughtered.
Absolutely slaughtered. It's like the whole, when Boris goes out to do a press conference, I'm like, imagine Sturgeon went out to address the daily briefing in our jammies with a fag hanging for her mouth and her rollers.
Aye.
You know what I mean?
Aye.
I remember there was a Daily Mail headline when her and Theresa May were sat in Butte House, and the two of them were sat, and they were obviously in their two-piece and whatever. There was the press picture of the two of them sat at the fireplace, and the Daily Mail's headline was, "The legs have it. The legs have it."
Oh my God, aye.
And you're like,
that happens to female politicians have that all the time, and as you say, it would never happen to a man. Johnson actually messes his hair up deliberately.
Yeah.
Imagine a woman went in with messy hair. I mean, they do get it all the time. I mean, Theresa May, way back before she was the Prime Minister and all that, it was all talk about shoes and all this kind of things. Kitten heels and all that stuff.
You're looking at David Cameron, you're going, that guy looks like a wee Lurpak, man.
I can't, no matter what he looks like, I just look at David Cameron and I know, did you put your knob in a dead pig's mouth? That's what I can't.
That is that. And it's fascinating, and I love watching all that stuff. I thought Sarwar done very well at the debate. I thought Sarwar done very well. My fear for Sarwar is, right, he clearly came out and tried to make a case for federalism without saying federalism, right? He's talking about local government and more power and all that, which, there's a very strong argument for. I'm no dead against it. But he came out, and my bit is, right, that's great that you're saying that, but here we go, we're going all the way back to the Viv again, because you're saying this. But see the guy down in London, he's like that. Oh no, the union must stay together. And I'm going, Keir, he's talking about federalism. Why don't you find a halfway point here, Keir? Maybe try and recoup some of that Scottish Labour vote. No interest. No. And Keir Starmer, I think as well, he's a very good barrister. He's very good at asking questions, but he can't answer them.
Yeah. I think he's been. There's something kind of really awkward looking about the guy. I think there's something not quite. The way he stands and everything makes me feel as if there's something not quite right here. Almost like he's a robot or something. But he's always kind of making wee gaffes and for them, as well. He's always coming out with things he said about Black Lives Matter. Then last week he was at this church doing his Easter message, and it was a church that preaches gay conversion therapy. And then he apologises later. I'm thinking, how the hell did you not know that? Because that's come up before. That exact church is famous for it.
I put on Twitter that Labour really need to employ someone to just read the fucking room. Just read the room.
Aye.
Just go and do your research. Just sit, go and do your research. See what's happening at the place that you're going to. Could you imagine Sturgeon pitching up at a church that would be putting forward gay conversion therapy? It just wouldn't happen.
No, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. They're on a tighter ship. Yeah.
Total
slicker. They're better at it.
Aye. And do you know the thing? Do you know the worst thing in this? See, Cameron and Osborne, they watched Campbell and Brown and Blair, and they absolutely just replicated it and made it a wee bit more, centre right. But the fact is, Boris's operation could not be. I mean, it's Del Boy's van, isn't it? It's the Trotter Independent Trading Company, Boris's operation, and Stammer can't lay a glove. And you're going, this operation's for, mate, they ordered PPE from a T-shirt manufacturer in Turkey.
I know. There was a guy I read about, it's one of their mates. He was the manager of a health club in Barbados or something. All of a sudden, he's got a £2 million PPE contract. It's unbelievable. It's someone that money for their pals. And as you say, they're going up in the polls. No matter what happens in the polls. So, it's not just about Starmer not laying a hand on him. I noticed the by-election that's in Hartlepool, the Labour's like miles behind the Tories, but the Labour vote's still going up. The percentage has gone up, but the Tories have gone up by much more. And so maybe it was years and years of have I got news for you and all that, having Boris on the telly, but he seems to be able to, if he comes on and looks like an idiot and talks like an idiot, his vote share goes up. People like him more.
Yeah, it's the whole Trump effect thing, because they think that he's more. So in America, they look at Trump and they see the money, the property, the life. So, in America, that's deemed a success, right? Doesn't matter. You could be Beelzebub and they'll still go, but he's a successful businessman. In this country, and I hate to use the word working classes, but we are talking about that traditional Labour vote, that northern vote from those northern heartlands. It seems to be in this country that if you've got a plummy accent and you talk with big words, it's almost like, and it's the whole working class syndrome of, I'm not going to get above my station here because he's more intelligent than me. And that's a thing that I think that's just not politics. That's something that for me is I would say if we had to split the working class, my dad was a spark, my mum was a home help, but I grew up in a bought house in an alright area of the East End, right? That's the, I'm not saying that we had a toilet out the back garden, but that's that kind of working class narrative, right? Where for me, also throw in the Roman Catholic lesbian and a stand-up, that narrative of the working class being eroded out the arts is the problem here. Because people like you and me, Jim, who deal in the currency of grit and reality, turn that into an art, whether it be music, poetry, comedy, something to laugh at, something to listen to, something to watch and enjoy. We can turn that into something, and from that, it gives the working class a voice.
Yeah.
That voice has been eroded.
Certainly has, and certainly in the arts, in the media, in politics, it's went backwards from the 1970s.
Yeah.
When you did start to see working class people, when I think it was something like, I think it was Owen Jones wrote about this, that there was At one point, 70% of the Labour Party MPs came from a sort of working background. They'd worked in another job and all that before they'd worked a normal job. And now it's like the opposite around. It's like 70 or 80% of them are like straight from Oxford into a PR company, into a Labour job. You know what I mean? So it's the same media. I saw Laura Kuenssberg saying, 10 years ago, somebody like me with my accent would never have got this job. But she went to Hutchie Grammar, and her granddad's a lord, and she thinks she thinks she wouldn't have got. You would always have got that job. Maybe not because you were a woman, but in general,
this will not be the first time I've heard this story about when dads are lords and they've somehow managed to make it to the top in the arts. What a surprise! Do you know what I mean? Hold on, I'm going to ask Alan the Spark how he thinks I'm going to, make it in the creative world.
Just dip into your trust fund, Susie. Your trust fund.
That's it. Which I'll show you my trust fund. I'll show you my trust fund. While we're here, there it is. There's
excellent. The Tenerife fund.
So I mean, and I think that's how that working class vote has managed to increase, because we have this thing, and it does my absolute box in, where we go, oh, they sound posh. Do you know what? This is going to come across as racist, and it's not. It's an English thing, because we don't think that. If we hear a plummy voice, we're like that. Fuck. Because it's the whole oppression thing, English power, money, all the things that we've not had. But that, and again, it comes back to class. Charles Kennedy, the late Charles Kennedy, done a programme on the Houses of Parliament, or the Palace of Westminster, and he was great, because Charles Kennedy was great, right? And he was stood at the door of the Palace of Westminster, and he went, if you look up here, you'll see the 4 saints of the British Isles. He went, so over here, we've got St. Patrick. He's right above the door. What does that tell you, right? And then he went, and over here, we've got St. Andrew. And that's the doorway that leads you down to the bars and the food. Because if there's one thing the Scots love, it's food and drink. He says, and over here, we've got St. David, and he's above the door of the House of Commons, because the Welsh love the sound of their own voice, right? And he said, and over here is patron saint St. George, who stands over the door of the House of Lords, because the English are obsessed with the class system. And I thought, what a phenomenal observation! Like, really, like clever, right? And so much of it, I think we can all see, and we can see that true. And I think that English class thing of the Tories just seem to do it better than Labour. Thatcher sold them the dream of buy your council house, you'll be middle class. What? Boris, I'm the man to lead this country. Churchill, this will be great again. We'll do it while you're sat in your social club. The Tories just seem to be really, really good at it until it comes north of the border. And that's maybe where Sturgeon's done it, because you see Sturgeon, and she carries herself very well, and she does her stuff very well. But you can see her, when it's like Boris is trying to usher her into her own house, and she's like, no, you'll know. And going back to Annabelle Goldie and Ruth Davidson, if there's one thing Scottish women were born to do, it's probably to be politicians.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Strong-willed women. I've got a joke just now where I talk about how Jean Freeman is like every auntie that you ever had that wasn't your auntie. You know what I mean? And
one of the aunties,
I like, hiya, Hayden. Do you know what I mean? Like, just a big Super King and a bingo marker in her bag. Do you know what I mean? And she's that auntie when you're 15, gives you a wee vodka and Diet Coke and a wee wink. You know what I mean? That auntie, and you know, whether you like these people or not, I'm not a Tory, but Davidson's a strong woman, Goldie's a strong woman, Sturgeon's a strong woman. You know, I mean, fuck. If you were picking a football team, right, out of all the leaders of the past 10 years, Willie Rennie would be like number 5 in your 5-a-side team. You know what I mean?
Aye.
Because Willie's like the substitute teacher, isn't he? That comes in and you're all like, this fucking guy. Our teacher's not in the day. Do you know
Poor
what I mean?
Willie, poor Willie. I mean, he's not. But Willie's harmless, and he's never going to do anything. He's never going to win any power or anything like that. So he's never going to get in the way of anything.
No.
And I feel sorry for the Lib Dems, because there was a time when I think the early 80s when the SDP came along and then they merged with the Lib Dems, and they were up there getting like 30% of the vote, and they all thought everything was going to change, and of course it didn't.
Well,
And then just went back to that other party, and especially in Scotland, because we've got the SNP, it means there's 4 parties, and probably now the Greens are probably as big as the Lib Dems, and I feel sorry for them. They're 1,000 years old or something, and they're still there, and they're still sort of trickling along. But they're always winning the Orkney and Shetlands, though.
I always think the Lib Dems are like the Episcopalian Church. Do you know? Nobody would really be adverse. You know, if somebody said to you, you know, if your partner said to you, I want to believe in God, I'm not a Catholic, you're a Catholic, let's meet in the middle and go to the Episcopalian. It's a bit like Diet Catholic. I think I'd probably be like, well, if it's important to you, all right. You know what I mean? I think the Lib Dems are just like, you know, they're no Catholic, they're no Protestant, you know, it's just they're like the Episcopalian Church of Scottish politics.
That's a good way of putting it. Aye, absolutely.
You know? But no, listen, it's going to be interesting. I think it'll be a whitewash. I hope it's a whitewash in the sense that a second independence referendum. And the EU's response to us now having a second independence referendum and subsequently joining the EU because we're no leaving a member state, because that member state has now left. Is a very different dynamic to what they were kind of worried about with Spain and Barcelona and all that kind of stuff. So, you know what?
So that would be your hope, that you would get like enough MSPs to make it like impossible for them to knock back a second referendum. Do you think?
Aye, 100%.
They're just going to knock you back anyway, aren't they? They're just going to say no anyway.
I think they're going to keep trying, but ultimately, I think old Papa Joe over the water, he'll probably stick his neb in a wee bit as well, because Papa Joe is certainly not a fan of the Brits, I believe he called.
I think he's I think I could see Joe Biden being like doing it, you know, like doing a pub in the Carlton, giving it the rest.
I can see this COP21 happening, and Joe Biden and the Pope just cutting about the Carlton in the bookshop, going for a pint in the Whistling Kirk. Do you know what I mean?
Aye, that's it.
I can't believe they kept Lennon on as long. But no, Joe's like, I tried, mate, but I had a lot on last November. But no, I mean, I think Joe, I think for me, Scotland's massively important geographically. I think we would, and I don't know how a lot of SNP voters would feel about this. I think a bargaining chip in that situation would be Trident. Would certainly be Coolport and Faslane with regards to position, but we've got military infrastructure that the British government has essentially shut down and run at a minimum, and the reason that infrastructure is there is because of Russia. We are, you know, the biggest country in the North Atlantic. North Atlantic's very important strategically. I'm not convinced Papa Joe wouldn't be involved in that. And I think that's something that we should all kind of think about and go, well, America doesn't run South Korea. It doesn't interfere in its politics. It doesn't do anything. It's just got some ships cutting about its waters, keeping an eye on North Korea.
Aye. So did you ever get Holy Loch American base back? Because that was quite good for the cheap fags and all that.
Hey, listen, not just that. It would get Rossi, man. Rossi'd be like that to Aaron. Oh, keep your cheese. You know, we'd all be in Rossi. Or the Emperor will be in Aaron. So I I think it's interesting times, mate. I don't know how much me and you'll see the benefit of it, but
We'll kick out the Brits. Kick the Brits out of Faslane and get the Yanks back in. At least they spend more money.
That's what I was going to say. They'll spend more dough. And also, I think your whole northeast coast will also benefit from that. And there's areas in that region that will really need that kind of economy bounce. So, I mean, I'm not. Susie, do you want to be South Korea? I'll take it. I'll take it.
Aye, I'd say so. Aye, better than South Korea than I don't know, South Shields. I would say.
Than this shambles. Know what I mean?
I'm going to let you get on. I think you said you got an interview tonight. An interview.
I've got a wee interview tonight because times are still tough, Jim. But we're getting there, mate. We're getting there.
Okay, we'll get back to normal soon. Once we get out gigging again, things will be normal. I just don't know whether we'll have lost all social skills. I can imagine that when the pubs open, there's people just talking to a wall and all that, and turning up in their jammies and everything.
Listen, I was doing. My brother stays in the most Middle England of Middle England, right? And this was about 2 years ago. Me and my girlfriend went into the local boozer on a Sunday afternoon, and there was 4 guys. 3 were drinking cider, and 1 was drinking Guinness, and he was clearly ostracised for the wee cider gang, and they all just stood watching the telly. And I've never turned around and walked out a pub in my life, like a pub that I could go and get a seat in or whatever, and I just was like, oh no. And I think that was the moment I knew this union's done for me, man. We are different people.
The wrong pub.
Yes, but listen, thanks very much for
just before you go, Susie, I'd like to ask if you'd help us pick some of the names for the question to see who goes through to the final here.
Go for it.
First of all, shout. So the question was a band name for a constituency in Scotland. I've got to say shouts to Alan Rorison and Keith Stoddart for definitely giving the most answers so far. Alan's answers included Cyprus Govan Hill.
Nice.
Oh, good one.
Royston Orbison.
Oh, nice.
Castlemilk Beefheart and his magic band, and half Manswood, half Biscuit.
Do you know what? I actually really love that Royston Orbison. That's a belter.
Okay, we'll take Royston Orbison through to the final then. And we've got Lou Rogerson says Annislin Lennox.
Come on, man.
All right.
Keith Stoddart says the Fun Govern Criminals.
Oh, yes, yep, no.
Deacon Ibrox Blue.
No, definitely not. 100%.
Oh, no.
Sighthill Mines.
Oh.
And Pilton Scream.
Oh, yeah. Oh, stretch it a bit.
What was the last one there?
Pilton Scream.
Pilton Scream. You're pushing that, isn't they? You're pushing
and we've
that.
got Paul says Elvis Paisley.
Do you know what? I would give you
Royston
Orbison and Elvis Paisley might not.
And we'll give one more. Mary says Edinburgh Westlife.
Out.
Oh, right, good one. It's a constituency.
Oh, of course it is. Aye.
Yeah.
I go for it. Edinburgh.
Okay, so they 3 go through to the final. There's still time to get involved in the comments, guys. Thanks very much, Susie. Follow Susie on Facebook at Susie McCabe Comedy and Susie _McCabe on Twitter. Nice one, Susie. Good luck with the interview. See you soon.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Susie. See you soon, pal.
We are going to have a panel discussion in a little second.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. So call that radio. We're going to be discussing drugs policy.
Your call is very important. Please hold.
Sorry about that. Jim, Monaghan, live.
Oh,
you call that policy?
I was getting a quick smoke there during the ad break. Yeah,
you better hope Donna didn't see that. She just tagged me, grassed me in for smoking a rollie in the sound check. Tagged the wrong guy though. Tagged the wrong guy. Some poor guy's probably quit smoking for 10 years, and he's just going to see his friends and family that he's smoking rollies. So that was amazing stuff. Thank you very much to Susie. Loads of comments coming in. I'll just read out a couple. We've got a good. Stuart McDonald and Alan Smith, it's good they said they'll be in ease back in as we'll be in NATO, and the Lisbon Treaty will oblige us to do so. Dr. Ghostboy says he never had any social skills anyway. Dr. Dempster's in the house, he says Eastwood 17.
Good one.
I think that might make it to the final. And Paul saying Trump is not a successful businessman. He would have made more money if he just bought Fortune 500 shares than his actual business model. For fuck's sake, he bankrupted a casino. It's very true. I suppose it kind of ties in what you're saying earlier about a guy who seemed to rise to the top after being born a millionaire. It's funny how that happens.
I know.
We'll go, I
mean, he started off with just a little bit of, just a couple of million for his dad and a property portfolio. It's amazing. He did so well.
And he just worked hard. He worked hard. Worked hard.
Pulled
his bootstraps up. Rolled his sleeves up, didn't he? For anyone who's watching us I know we're on Facebook, Twitch and Twitter. For the discussion panel, you need to switch to YouTube. That's where the rest of the show will be on. If you're already on YouTube, then you don't need to do anything. But if you are not on YouTube already, then join us here for the panel discussion. I'll put the link in the comments here. That's the link. Click that and it'll take you through to YouTube, which is where everyone's it's where everyone's chatting anyway. It's better quality sound, better quality video, and it's where all the comments are coming in. So we're going to have a discussion. So basically every week there's going to be a theme on You Call That Politics between now and election night. And drugs. Tell us about drugs, Jim.
What I wanted to talk about was like drugs, but there's been a lot of talk this year about drugs policy. The Peter Crichton's safe consumption van, a lot of the arguments been typical political stuff about which party's responsible, which government's responsible, what our powers are devolved or no. What we want to talk about tonight is what would we like to see? What would be the best way of doing things? Do you know? And it's about time we started like imagining things better. You know, saying, you know, this is how we should do things. Not just say, oh, we can't do this or we can't do that. Let's find out the best. Let's speak to the people who know what they're talking about and find out what's the best way to do things.
Amazing stuff, and it's a really great lineup of guests. Can you just want to give us a wee introduction to them all?
We've got Simon McClean. Simon's an ex-cop who is now part of LEAP, and he advocates a completely different way of looking at drugs laws and how we treat drug use in this country. We've got Paul Sweeney, who's a former member of Parliament, and Paul's been out helping and working with Peter Crichton's drug safe consumption van or bus, or whatever it's called. And we've got a real Kent face to people on You Call That Radio. We've got Donna Boyd, who's here to talk about her own lived experience and what she thinks about the current drugs policy and what we could do better.
Amazing stuff. Let's just bring them on. Give me a little second to bring them on, and that gives you, if you're still watching on Facebook, Twitter, or was another on Twitch, then hit the link now to watch it on YouTube. We'll see you in a little second.
Yeah, no respect in the way I speak to the man like Mark. They love what the man talk on the radio. In case you never know. You call that radio, call that the radio. You call that radio, call that the radio. Come and say, my name, I'll just go with the flow. My name, I'll just go with the flow. So till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Boom. Lot of mercy. Yo. You call that radio. You call that radio. Come and say, don't you be another man, I'll go lose your head. Say, don't you be another man, say, I'll lose the head. I say, radio, call that radio. Straight from out of Glasgow. Straight from out of Glasgow, nice setting up all the studio. Come and say, in me, my name, I'll just go with the flow. In me, my name, I'll just go with the flow. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. No radio. You call that the radio. Them man I give you Mr. Letter subject, and them I think I'm on your can't object. So don't you ever come and disrespect. I love and respect in a every aspect.
As you call that Politics Episode 1, it's the first panel discussion of the season. Welcome Donna, welcome Simon, welcome Paul. I'll be in the background if you need a cup of tea or anything, just let.
Hi guys. How's it going?
Right, Jim.
Sorry for the wee bit of delay there. This is the first week, so I imagine we will be done about 7:30. But we'll know for next week for the next one. Sorry to keep you a wee bit later. So I wanted to just get around you all and ask you just briefly a kind of question at the start, and I'll maybe start with Donna. And in terms of where you're coming from and your situation, with all three of you, I'll ask you a specific question. And Donna, I was going to ask, if we were looking at policy, if we were looking at how things are done right now, what could we do that would make a real difference, make an actual difference to people who are trying to make that journey from drug use to recovery? What simple things can be done by any government, whoever it is or whatever party, that could make a difference to what you do and to what other people do?
I don't. It's hard. It's hard to just pinpoint single things, Jim. I think education and choice is two of the big ones. Not just education to people that are in addiction, but education to services and stuff. I came from a background of trauma, and I couldn't get help with the trauma while I was in addiction, but I couldn't get out the addiction because of the trauma. So it's like, do you know what I mean? There's loads of stuff.
Aye. Do you think there's just things like increasing the amount of services available, increasing the amount of rehab places and amount of social workers? Would that help? Or?
You can throw money and increase services, but unless people know that recovery is possible and that they've got the choice, because what you're talking about recovery for me is abstinence-based recovery. Recovery for somebody else is maybe just stopping chaotic heroin drug use or another substance drug use. Yeah. So it's like people need that choice. They need to know that there is a choice, and they need to know. Then if they make that leap to go down that road, then that stuff needs to be available for them.
I was always quite impressed with. It used to be down in Govan Hill, a group that met every week called Crew, who were like kind of self-organised recovery group. And I was always really impressed by the fact that it was the people who were in recovery themselves that was running it and setting up their service to suit themselves, and they knew better. And I think that was a big part of what I thought they were very successful. It was like Claire Muirhead and Thomas and various other people there that were they knowing what you're talking about and being from that background yourself seemed to make them a lot more of use to the people that were coming to their service. They kind of spoke the same language, if you knew what I mean. They knew what they were talking about.
And it's that power example thing. In 12-step recovery, they talk about a power example and attraction to recovery, and that's what things like that do. Do you know what I mean? It makes it like people in active addiction see people that have got out it, and that becomes then attractive and shows people that it's possible.
Aye. Paul, I was going to ask you about the Peter's safe consumption van. Now, obviously, it was a big subject, and I thought it was quite unfortunate that the argument was all about whether powers were devolved or not, and it got away from the actual real issue of did it work? Did it make a real difference to people's lives?
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Jim. Like, the biggest frustration I've experienced in this whole drug debate since I became an MP, 2017, I have to say I hadn't any great experience of the issues with drugs before that. I learned by learning from constituents, people in Boswell Park and Springburn who were experiencing this in various different ways. And it was fairly eye-opening for someone who went from being a private citizen with a fairly insulated from the whole situation to sort of learning the real damage that actual government policy was causing to people's lives. So that's been the big eye-opener for me. And the biggest frustration has been the recognition that it has to be everything everywhere at once. So, you know, we're talking about what's the best thing to do to help people. Well, there's a whole suite of things that need done immediately at once everywhere. And the problem we've had is political figures cherry picking certain things that suit their preconceived agendas. And that just hammers any progress because it ultimately doesn't solve the problem. And then people say, well, that one thing didn't work, so it didn't work, so we should bin it. You know, and it's a good example with the safe consumption facilities. We actually recognised, I mean, there was this initial presumption that it was illegal. And it was Peter and I were sort of saying, do you know what, I read this 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. There's nothing in it that says that injecting drugs is illegal. The act of possession is illegal. But actually the act of preparation and consumption on a premises is only illegal in respect of cannabis and opium. So that's why cannabis cafes and opium dens are illegal. But everything else, the law is silent on, because this, again, is a law that's half a century old. That's, you know, really out of date and doesn't recognise the reality of what people are facing on the ground. So my view is the first step, the most important thing, is to recognise where people are actually at on the ground. There's a whole number of things, you know, just meeting some of the people there. They've built up particularly with Peter, they've built up a real trust with him as a figure that they can go to. But I mean, he isn't equipped to sort of counsel people or to deal with the other aspects of their lives that need sorted. You know, he's only there to just keep them alive, basically, to supervise an injection that otherwise be happening round the corner in a filthy alleyway at the back of the Britannia Amusements on the Trongate, you know, and making sure they're not getting infected or whatever. You know, that's a very baseline sort of effort to just keep people safe, you know. But the beauty of the safe consumption or anti-overdose facility is that you could actually build an infrastructure around it, that the act of going to this safe place, you could then, you know, get dental treatment, you could get GP treatment, you could get social work, mental health services, you could get housing services, you know. And the ultimate evolution of this for me would be, why are we even allowing the continued monopoly of drugs to be in the hands of criminal gangsters? And we know the sort of exploitation and the cancerous nature of it in our communities across the city, most notably in the north of Glasgow, where I represent as an MP. That's the real damage that's been caused. So if you could say to people, how about we take the thing you're buying off of these dealers, test it to see what it is you're taking, and then we'll prescribe an exact substitute for it, and in future just come here and get it for free. And then see the money you're saving, how about we help you use that to stabilise your life and help your kids or whatever. You know, that would be the pathway towards success from my point of view. And like we were saying, you know, there could be any number of different pathways to recovery, whether, you know, and that's the thing, again, a value judgment is always often the case where it's abstinence-based. You have to sort of confess or whatever that you've done something morally wrong, you know, just kind of Victorian judgment about it all. It's like the workhouse or something, you know, before you can access services, you know. And the same situation we've got with people who can't get access to bank accounts, they've not got any fixed address, they can't get a job, and then they can't get housing. If they go into recovery, they get their house taken off by the housing association or something. You know, so we've got all sorts of perverse incentives that just knock people around like a ping pong ball, you know, and it's just causing chaos. It's hard enough to be poor, you know, without that situation, you know. So sorry if it's a bit of a ramble, but that's kind of an increasing Donna realization.
No, I understand you. I was working in.
It's also exciting because it's a sort of realization. You go, well, the solutions are kind of presenting themselves to you. Like, you can see where the problems are, but they're also showing you where the solutions can be.
Yeah. I mean, I worked in the Scottish Parliament in 2006 as a researcher on the Drugs and Rehabilitation Bill, which was put forward by Rosemary Byrne, who was an SSP MSP. And it was the idea was the very, very simple things that she was saying. You know, if you can get people to come to a place for something, then you can provide all the other support that they need there. Then you can introduce them to people who can help them get out of their chaotic lifestyles. But if you're sending somebody if somebody's sent to a criminal to get their drugs, then obviously you've got no control over it. So I mean, you can't really help people. You know, so to me that sounds very simple but reasonable, and it's quite astounding that after all these years of drugs being criminalised, that we're still in that situation, you know, where we hand it over to the criminals. And I was going to ask Simon there, it's a good time to bring in Simon. Simon, But when did you make a journey to the position you hold now on drugs, or was that when you were working as a police officer? Was it already apparent that those were the way we looked at drugs and dealt with drugs was wrong already?
Well, I need to take you back to late 70s for that, Jim, a long time ago. And remember, we're only young men. Drugs was quite new to the country at that time. Heroin was just making its heyday in Edinburgh at the time. If you think of train spotting and all these things, it was a different world that we lived in. And what the rhetoric that we were hearing is the same rhetoric that we're hearing today from politicians. And I've been doing a wee bit of research about that, about the war on drugs in 1971, because that's when the Misuse of Drugs Act came in this country. And that war was declared by President Nixon on the 18th of June, 1971. Now, that's a bit of a stretch to think back. Some of us here will be able to recall from our childhood what was going on in the world at that time. But Vietnam was just about to finish. Kennedy was assassinated in 64 or 63, remember? And we were talking about the Summer of Love in 67. Music was becoming a thing, smoking marijuana, peace was a big thing, anti-war demonstrations, hippies became stigmatized at that time. And the theory that I'm looking at just now is that the war on drugs was invented by the American government deliberately to target blacks and the hippie movement, because they couldn't have people going about, and communism was the big threat that they could see coming from the left. So the war on drugs wasn't an accident. You're talking, Jim, like we all do now, as if this is common sense. How can nobody see what's required to be done here? Because it is common sense. And when we go out and speak to panels of people, they all convert over. They start off thinking legalize drugs, and they end up thinking, yeah, that's what we need to do, because we've just been fed for 50 years by the stuff like Boris comes out with, like cut the head off the snake and 20,000 more officers were going to clamp down. I'll explain to you in a minute if you want why that's an absolute waste of time and has been for 50 years. And to answer your question, to my shame, I didn't really understand just what I'd been doing until 6 months ago.
How did that come about then?
I brought out a book in September, Jim, and I was doing an interview about it on a true crime podcast. And the interviewer, Sean Atwood, asked me about drugs, and we spent 20 minutes. And I basically said to him, it was a waste of time. For every drug dealer and for every seizure that we made, there was 2 or 3 ready to step into the breach, because the supply lines are only feeding the market. The demand is there. It's become what it is, a billion-pound, multi-billion-pound marketplace. And to think that you can do anything about it without stopping the criminal element that we feed every day. We were talking about referees and football and stuff earlier on. As a policeman, you like to think that you're in the middle ground, you're that thin blue line, which is quite a neutral line between the two factions of whoever is contesting something. And that's where we all thought we were in the drugs war, that we were protecting the good side from the bad side. I've now got a saying that drugs aren't illegal because they're dangerous. They're dangerous because they're illegal. Because that was a deliberate thing. Drugs are a health issue, not a crime issue. But we can come back to that. That neutrality, where I thought I was that couldn't have been further from the truth. Because I now know that every time the police make a seizure, make an arrest, make a bust, they actually feed the fire that is the drugs war. They increase it. It's like a fireman putting petrol on the fire. If you think of the biggest drug busts you could ever imagine in Colombia or whatever, if you think of it, Pablo Escobar, or the biggest drug bust, millions and millions of pounds worth of drugs, it didn't affect the marketplace in the slightest. All it did was cause a lot of wars and a lot of deaths, with people fighting over his business for a few years.
If we don't address the demand, which I think goes back to what Donna was saying earlier on about education, if we don't address the demand, then the market's always going to be there. But I don't know if anyone wants to come in there. How do you address the demand? How do you create a situation where less people want to use illegal drugs or drugs?
Okay, well, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. If you think about alcohol, and if we think about prohibition, that's what the Americans tried to do in the 20s, and it's what the Irish tried to do with whiskey back in the 1800s. Prohibition, we all know that are listening to this tonight, that it's bound to fail. If you deny people something, all you do is create a black market if people want to use it, and that's what prohibition has done. And LEAP used to stand for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's now Law Enforcement Action Partnership, because there are so many organisations like ours out there striving for the same thing. But we've got 3 things that we want to put in place, and we're very, very clear about this, along with our partners. We want to decriminalise drugs, slightly different from legalised, but along the same lines. Take it away from crime altogether, all drugs, out, decriminalised. So it's now a health issue. Just like alcohol, we have regulations. That's the second thing. Regulate drug use, like we do with alcohol. We have premises where you can get them. We have ages that you can buy them at. We have restrictions and regulation around drug use, ranging from cannabis and its forms right through to opioids. And it might be that you have to get your opioids to a doctor or to a chemist, and you must take them in certain premises or whatever. But we can regulate. Those are the 2 things that would give us control of the marketplace. Because at the moment, we're letting our kids go out and buy them from wherever they can get them. And the criminals are in control. So we're taking control. And the third part of that is what we've been talking about tonight, is to put signposts in place, put help in place, put different forms of rehabilitation in place. It's much cheaper to rehabilitate someone than it is to house them in Berlin. That's for sure. We have to put the services in place that Peter doesn't have just now. He can save someone's life, but he's really got nowhere he can send them other than off his own bat. And he goes on Twitter quite often. I've been with him at the ambulance, and he's got nowhere to send these people except to phone a doctor or phone the hospital. So we need that third strand, and the 3 of them have to work hand in hand. If we only go for the third one to help the victims, and in my mind, the victims are the people that are addicted to drugs at the moment, or using drugs, misusing them, then we're just feeding the end of the conveyor belt. We need to look at the whole conveyor belt, and it starts, as you say, with that demand. Accept that there's a demand, and then take control of that and regulate it, so that we know what people are using, where they're using it, and we know who they are.
Jim, I would say the major issue we've got to address is the same problematic use as any other kind of legal substance, including alcohol and tobacco. You know, the reality is, underlying issue is somewhat psychological, often associated with economic and social alienation. You see the most problematic issues in communities where there's been sustained deindustrialization, loss of skilled employment, and a kind of intergenerational issue of that kind of dislocation from, you know, progress. And I think that's the root cause of a lot of issues that drive problematic use. I agree with what Simon was saying about, you know, you need a baseline which is regulated. But actually what we're seeing driving a lot of the deaths in Scotland is a combination of different use. So it's, for example, it's a combination of legal and illegal drug use. So, for example, NHS policy has changed in Scotland so that benzodiazepines are very hard to come by through prescription. So Valium you can't access for to treat depression, basically. So people are getting it outside a pub door, for £5 for a strip of Valium. They're then taking that along with alcohol, and perhaps with methadone, and that's collapsing their airway and they're suffocating to death. It's not the classic sort of overdosing on heroin necessarily that's causing the increase in drug deaths in Scotland. It's a combination of drugs being used in that kind of way. So it's a hybrid of different types of use, and that, you know, you could unpick the reasons why that sort of behaviour is going on, but a lot of it's because increasingly medical fashion's changing, medical policies changed in the NHS, but also tightening that regulations pushed onto the street. So even regulating sometimes comes with risks. So that's something we need to bear in mind as well.
I mean, just on that point, I've lost quite a few friends to drugs, mainly heroin. I mean, probably as many as a dozen over the years, where I come from in my background. And the sort of dual thing you're saying about alcohol is, just to come back on what Simon said there, alcohol is regulated and legal. Gambling is regulated and legal. Yet in working class communities across Scotland, addiction to alcohol and addiction to gambling absolutely still devastates communities and devastates families. So what is it that's driving the addiction? I don't know if Donna's got anything to say about this. What is it that's about driving the addiction, and especially in working class communities, in areas that's deindustrialised communities, that is not just simply looking at the criminalisation and how we do it and how we deal with each thing. Is we still have a huge problem with the regulated things, with the legal things. I mean, gambling addiction is horrific. You know, people can wipe out their whole month's pay in a matter of 2 hours and leave their family starving. You know, I don't know if you get anything to say about that, Donna, but is addiction slightly different if you're looking at just the drugs problem? Is it a wider thing?
For me, it wasn't about the drugs. For me, it was about all the underlying stuff, changing how I felt about things, searching for something, searching to be part of something. Like Paul was saying there, I know that I grew up in a wee town where lots of factories and stuff shut. There was a lot of high unemployment. There was generational trauma, and people just used substances to get away from all that. So if you're not dealing with all that stuff, you're not dealing with why people are using things, whether they're regulated or non-regulated.
That's a really good point, actually, because when my hometown's Cumnock, and when heroin hit Cumnock, was not at that sort of first wave train spotting type thing. It was after everything shut. It was in the 1990s after the pits had gone. So it was a certain generation that sort of people my age and slightly older than that generation, heroin was a kind of an unusual thing that was really used. And people younger than that are looking at it and it didn't really take on and keep going. But there's a generation of people probably born in the early 70s that heroin was just devastating to Cumnock at that time. And it did fall, whether coincidental or not, fall exactly at the time of just after the pits shut, after the jobs left. You know, the heroin thing became a big thing. I don't know if there's any if anyone wants to answer that. Is there a social problem we have in Scotland that drives this kind of thing?
I don't think it's peculiar to Scotland, although that's what we're talking about tonight, and we're certainly victims of it. But I think that the problem is, I heard somewhere that 90% of people who use substances, including alcohol, never have any problem with it. A lot of people can have a wee blow or use recreational drugs, certainly have a glass of wine or a pint on the way home or whatever. 90-something% never have any issue with it. The people we're talking about that develop issues with it, as far as drugs are concerned, we don't know who they are until it's too late, because we don't have any control, because they're buying it off people that we don't even know who they are very often. They're buying amounts that we don't know the purity of, we don't know the source of it, we don't know how much it's cut, we don't know anything about it, basically. If we had regulation, we would know who the people were that were using it and to what degree they were using it and what they were using. And we could give them advice, we could give them guidance, like we give warnings on fag packets, for goodness sake. And we could signpost them towards life-changing facilities that could deal with the issues that got them there in the first place. And my point is that those 10% generally come from similar backgrounds of child abuse, poverty, race discrimination, all the issues in our society that ostracize people and make people vulnerable to this kind of addiction, as we're calling it.
Yeah, good point, Simon. Paul, I want to ask you about the politics. When you spent a couple of years down there in that there Parliament, not long enough as far as I'm concerned. But do you think there's any political will or mood? Do you think it's changing? Because what I always imagined is, years ago, the idea of any political party talking about looking at drugs in a different way would have been slammed by all the newspapers. The older generation wouldn't have understood it, and nobody would have voted for them, and they would have But we're now at a time when the generation that are now sitting in the House of Commons are the generation who are well used to drugs, who possibly most of them have used drugs at some point, have certainly come across them and know people. And so is it different? Is it changing? Or is there a fear there of politicians to say, if I say something controversial, I might lose my seat or whatever?
Well, the average age of MPs is in the late 50s, so it's always at a lag, so it takes a while for the next generation to catch up when it comes to the political establishment. But certainly, that was my experience down there. We were talking about Douglas Ross earlier on. remember we had a debate about safe consumption rooms, one of the first debates I did in Parliament, and we were talking about how there was over 90 in cities around the world. No one had ever died in them. They were demonstrably effective at reducing death rates. You know, we're talking about the Portuguese example, the Danish examples. You know, there's widespread evidence now to demonstrate the effectiveness of these harm reduction measures. And, you know, Douglas Ross appeared with a pre-written speech and just totally cut at odds with everything that had been discussed, you know, so it felt like there was no interest in actually, or no intellectual curiosity in actually learning about the evidence, understanding the issue and finding solutions. It was just about speaking to an audience that was outside the Parliament and, you know, no doubt sort of preconceived and very entrenched in their views, or at least they think. And I think that the real political bravery is actually taking on those arguments, taking on those myths and those preconceived ideas about drugs being effectively a sort of poison, you know, and, you know, it goes back to this point about, you know, the nature of problematic use. The root cause is very much about the social violence that's been committed by, in many cases, the Tory party policies against communities for decades now. You know, Scotland experienced disproportionately that because it had the most intensive industrialisation, but then the most intensive deindustrialisation. So you've had communities that have been more acutely affected in many other parts of Britain by that. So maybe the hardships affected us more. But I think even going back to the days of like when Billy Connolly would talk about the casual vomit working in the shipyards, you know, people hard drinking. It was a very tough existence working in heavy industry. You know, so people would medicate to cope with working in it, and they've also medicated to actually deal with its collapse. You know, and the government's not even addressed those issues, never mind the lived reality many people are feeling. So there has been a creeping movement towards progress. I think the next generation is learning the evidence. There's been a weird alliance in Parliament between sort of socialists, social democrats, and sort of Tory libertarians, you know, who actually, you know, philosophically believe in the idea of, you know, laissez-faire access to sort of substances, etc. So it's going to try to build that weird alliance together just to make these arguments, you know, however people might approach it, it's ultimately driven by the evidence that the current drugs policies are completely alien to any reason that we now understand the nature of the problem and how we address that. But I guess people are fearful, yes, of the sort of the press establishment who might run, you know, quite alarmist headlines, etc. But what's been fantastic, actually, in this experience around this pilot with Peter has been the support of the Daily Record. Has been fantastic. Mark McGivern in particular, you know, not too long ago, the Record had been running those kind of headlines, and a working class prejudice towards drugs. Now there's a much different attitude, and that's given me some hope for the future that, you know, going into this next Parliament, hopefully in Scotland, we can potentially stretch the boundaries a bit and see what we can do to actually see if we can deliver this in a sort of official capacity.
I noticed that, especially Mark McGivern. I know Mark is a good lad, and I noticed his coverage in the Record was very, very positive, and has changed what you'd expect from mainstream press. What I was maybe also what to ask all three of you probably is that thing about politicians, about where's this message coming from? Who is the person that's like representing the views? So you've got somebody like Douglas Ross, as you say, reading out a pre-written line, but the people who are affected by drugs and the people who have used the drugs, the people who have recovered, or the people who have lost people. I saw a woman on the other day speaking just after her son's funeral, and he's 20 years old or something. And I don't think we see enough real voices, and I think that's generally true of politics in general, that we don't hear enough lived experience, and we don't hear from people who know what they're talking about, which I think is a big problem. So a politician talking about drugs is often the wrong person to talk about it, because they took their cocaine when they were at Oxford, and then inherited their million quids or whatever like that, and live a life of 70 grand a year in a trust fund. And so I'm not saying they're all like that, Paul, but they're detached from the reality. And I wonder if there's anything to do with the message we put across comes from the sort of lack of representation for people with actual lived experience. I don't know if you want to answer that one, Donna, if you think there's a point to that.
Yeah, I think there's more people with lived experience talking up now. There's advocacy, there's rights-based approaches, and it's just doing it the right way, but isn't it? It's going about it the right way. I think Peter's run for Parliament this year, so it's just getting voices in a position where people are going to listen to them. But for a place where they're not coming across, all right, rightfully so, maybe angry sometimes, but it's like being measured in your response to things. You're muted, Jim. You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, that's it. Mark must have muted me. Mark wanted me to shut up. So I know, like Train Spotting, for instance, was seen as a groundbreaking book and things like that. And the representation of drugs and culture to me is also problematic as well, because in the Train Spotting, I remember reading the Train Spotting book at a time when heroin was rife in Cumnock. It was ripping through the community, the generation under me, the ones that are now probably in their late 40s and all that. It was terrible. We were losing people quite regularly, and it was becoming a terrible issue in a village, basically. But when the Train Spotting film came out, I found it really problematic in that the horror that was in that book, the absolute horror that was in that book, became a bit jokey and funny, and there were good guys and all got off, apart from one guy dying, everybody else came out of it okay. And at the same time, that Christmas, everybody was getting the Train Spotting DVD. They were also getting the Pulp Fiction one. And there's Travolta taking heroin and he goes dancing with Uma Thurman. And I sometimes wonder, do we present it wrongly in culture in general when we look at the television? Do we see the real story about drugs?
I think you do to a degree. But see, when we talked about lived experience, and I know where Donna's coming from, I know who we mean when we talk about lived experience, but something that we've been trying to get across to everyone is that lived experience permeates every single tier of our society. Everyone that pays insurance, that puts kids out in the street to go to school. Organised crime has got such a grip on this country and on our economy globally that it affects us and the price we pay and everything. Our kids' security. It's probably one of the biggest child protection issues in the country. There are 50,000 children estimated under the age of 14 being used to transport drugs about England and Wales. This is a child protection issue as much as it is. We're all living the experience because organised crime underneath, with people trafficking, with terrorism, with firearms, with robberies, with all the things, fraud, major frauds, things we couldn't even comprehend, counterfeit currency, some of the global scams. And you can do that when you've got billions of pounds to invest. And that's without mentioning the word corruption. Our very institutions that we rely on can be corrupted when you've got a business that's turning over £50 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And we give them that market, Jim. We've handed that market to the very worst among us that have no morals whatsoever. Life has no value. Nothing has got any value to them. They're absolutely ruthless in everything that they do. The sex industry, everything is underpinned by the cash that we let them earn by giving them the drugs market and saying that's illegal. If you deal with that, you need to go to those guys to get your drugs. And I think the thing you're talking about the movies, I think that's great because we want to show drugs are being used. We don't want to hide it. They're not going to go away because we don't show it on TV. Cigarettes didn't disappear because we hid them behind the counter. We need to take.
I get that. Yeah, I get that. I think I just meant. I think with me it just affected me. Those two movies affected me badly because at a time when heroin was a real problem in my town, they didn't portray them as that bad. But I suppose, as you say, there's a lot of people. 90% of people that use any kind of substance. It won't be that bad for them. So I suppose there's a kind of true reflection in that as well. Could I ask, I mean, I know this is a kind of tough question, but to all three of you, and you can go in whatever order you want, if there's one thing that in the next Scottish Parliament, one thing that the government could change or pass, what would it be? What do you think?
Well, I go first. All right.
I think so.
What's been really promising coming out of this pilot has been sort of flushing out the reality that the Scottish Parliament could do so much more. And the sort of reality is, if it had been illegal, the police would have charged us already for being at that van and for facilitating drug use. So the fact that the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act is silent on this issue is an important step in this pilot to prove that legal aspect. You might have seen Andrew Kel's piece in the National about this, about one of his students asked him, how is it exactly illegal? And he went through a whole discussion about the reality that it actually is in a grey area. And everywhere in the world this has started, it's been an illegal grey area, and then the legislature's caught up afterwards. So the goal in the next Parliament, hopefully, Peter is standing for election, but I'm committed to this as well, to take forward a bill in the next Parliament for Safe Consumption Sites Scotland Act, which would basically regulate and provide a legal framework for the operation of these sites across Scotland, so that wouldn't mean that doctors and nurses would be risking getting struck off or whatever if they were to work in this facility, and also provide a means to provide state funding to make sure there's a network of them operating around the country. That would be the first goal, to try and get that bill through the Parliament. That would be a real breakthrough for us, I think, and it would be a real test for the innovation and devolution as well. I think that's something that we really want to look for in the next Parliament, something that's innovating devolution. We often focus on what we can't do with devolution. I think we need to focus more on what we can do, and that'd be really good. And potentially then moving on to looking at how we reduce the threshold to access prescribing, safe prescribing. Wales are really leading the way on drug testing, so let's look at what other parts of the UK are doing, and also changing the culture around prosecution. Even if we can't necessarily make possession illegal at the Scottish Parliament, we can certainly change the policies in Police Scotland to sort of make it more able to do diversionary sort of pathways into something that's more health-based than into Barlini, which we've discussed as a really inefficient use of public money.
That's something I pass that on to Simon. Actually, I mean that's entirely within the powers of the Scottish Parliament or Police Scotland, or actually, I don't know whether it's whoever the chief of police is and things like that. It's entirely within their powers, surely, to just say, right, we're not going to charge everybody we find with this or that or possession.
And it's one of the pities that Peter wasn't taken to court, because he was charged under Section 23 with obstruction under the Misuse of Drugs Act. But he never went to court. He got offered a warning if he accepted a warning, which he refused, and then they just dropped the case. From our point of view, not from Peter's, and I've told him this, it would have been better if he'd gone to court and we'd got some kind of ruling, we'd got some kind of legal basis for us to move forward, like Paul's putting forward there. So that's all the nuances of it. But you're absolutely right. We had a lawyer on an event of ours a couple of weeks ago, Scotland's Lawyer of the Year, actually, and he's talking about smart justice, how he stands up in court and speaks for his clients who are appearing for all sorts of crimes, but mainly driven by their life experiences and events of trauma through their lives, and that 10% that I was talking about earlier on. And judges are now starting to take cognizance of that. Not what is the person here for? Why did the person end up here? And where can we send them, or what can we send them to that might stop them coming back? Because it's the same people that go through our system all the time. And we need to break those links that cause that and have a look at what we're doing, where we're signposting people to. So smart justice is a big thing in there as well. There's the one thing I would choose for the government to do, and it's a very, very simple thing that I think everybody has wanted our politicians to do for a long, long time. And they're good at promising it when there's an election in the offing. And we were promised it in Scotland, a new politics. And we tried to changed the way we voted and how they were counted to try and get some kind of spread of the politician. And it was referred to earlier on about having a different representation in there. I think joined up non-political party thinking would be a start instead of towing the party line. Because when you listen to the leader of the Labour Party, he's way out of step with modern thinking within his own party and the own reports that are coming out. So we need to, and instead of point scoring and blaming Westminster and all this stuff, and using jargon, the rhetoric that we've heard in the last few months, this is an emergency. We've neglected it. It's now an emergency. I tell you what, see, if I went to an emergency call at this pace, I wouldn't have been a policeman for much longer. There's no blue light flashing. I've not even been able to get a hold of Angela Constance on behalf of LEAP to have a conversation with her, to let her know what ex-law enforcement think about this. So this mission all these words that are used, all this rhetoric that's used, get rid of it. Get round the table with people that know what they're talking about and have a real, honest conversation, like Paul is trying to start off there, about where we go from here.
Don, I was thinking, and what Simon said there about the lawyer in court and that. If you come across people that are sort of with drug use problems and things, does that make a huge difference? Does that add to their trauma? Does that add to the chaos in their life? The fact that there's a risk of being arrested, go to jail, possibly losing your council house when you're in jail, things like that. Is that a big part of the chaotic situation?
Well, speaking for myself, yeah, it was a big part of my active addiction was getting caught up in the criminal justice system, in and out of prison, and the more you up in front of a judge, the longer your sentences got. But whereas if there was an intervention, and I believe there is organisations now that try to do these things, but it takes like lawyers and judges and all that to come in on that stuff, and the kind of smart justice that Paul was talking about.
Jim, just a quickie about the court system. I've got a friend he's actually in the big house to do, but he was up a couple of months ago on the usual nonsense charges. But as Donna says, it just builds up. He's not a thief. He's not a drug dealer. He's nothing like that. He's just down in his luck for the last 20 years since his mum died. His life's been in a spiral. But he was at the sheriff court and he got asked to plead. And what his lawyer and I had decided that he should do was not plead and tell the sheriff that he wasn't well. And when the sheriff said to him, "How do you plead, Mr. Such and Such?" he said, "I'm not sure, but I really want to apologise for being not well." He then gets sent to Stop Hill for a month to get off whatever he was doing at the time and get some help and treatment. So there's no rocket science here. It's political will that's required. But somebody said to me recently, Simon, things don't change. Major things don't change over history because of politicians. They change because society wants them to change, because of social movement. And that's what we're trying to do, is talk to people one at a time, if need be, to change this view that we've been fed for 50 years. We've been told drugs are bad, don't use drugs. Biggest lot of nonsense. And the hardest guys to talk to are our colleagues that are still in the job, but even they're coming round. Even they're starting to question what they're doing. And talking about Peter Crickhant, I was speaking to him the other day, cops are stopping people leaving the van and searching them. Stop and search as they leave the facility. So there's a real quandary in there, and yet the police are now carrying naloxone to save lives. So there's all these contrary, conflicting, we need a conversation. If nothing else, we need to say, this hasn't worked. We've tried it for 50 years and prohibition has failed. This is what we've ended up with. Let's all sit together, throw the party stuff out the window and have a grown-up conversation with people that know what they're talking about and decide where we go from here.
How do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week? Every country on earth is trying to figure out how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle?
You call that radio?
Makes coherent sense.
Absolutely amazing stuff. Hold on, I'm going to mute someone. amazing conversations from everyone there, and we're going to go back to them to sum it up a little bit more. You're watching You Call That Politics on You Call That Radio. This show would not be possible without the help of all our patrons who support this show. If you enjoyed tonight's show and you want to see more, then help us build the thing at patreon.com/You Call That Radio. The competition's going really well. There's lots of new competitions, but before we'll do the competition to win one of these t-shirts for the best constituency band name in a little bit, but let's just talk about the actual conversation at hand here. Good conversation. Sadly not heard much in the media, says Danny. Kevin says, I don't think there's any political saviours. I've no faith in any politician. Alan says, minimum pricing on alcohol seemed like a well-intentioned idea at the time. How much has that changed though, especially during lockdown with folk using supermarkets off licences instead of the pub? Very good point, Alan. And Anita, if drugs are decriminalised and regulated, how much of this finance would be put into helping people to recover both physical addiction and psychological trauma? Hopefully, that would be the point of it, I would hope. We'd need to make sure that is the case. Impress saying, get the pushers out of our community. Jay Lee says, spot on what Donna said. And Susie saying, I'm curious as to how the big dealers and suppliers would react if there was decriminalisation of drugs. I'm enjoying the discussion and I'm open to hear everything being said. And Alan's also added, referring to intravenous drug users as junkies is really unhelpful and stigmatises people who have an addiction and are really struggling with it. Bang on, Alan. I agree with that. And Mickey Mouse saying, brilliant chat, thank you, good show as well. Guys, this is good. Says Ali. Ali had a good point as well. Ali, I'm just going to read that out. Just going through all your fantastic suggestions of band names to find what Ali said. It was something about she'd worked in the field for 7 years, Ali. I don't know where that is, but it was a good point if you want to... Oh yeah, here it is. I worked in the drugs field for 7 years. If an approach where drugs are illegal clearly isn't working, common sense would tell you to go the other way and legalise the law. And Tam, when you were talking about, I think it was when you were talking about Cumnock, Jim, he said my bro was chairman of LCC back then. Oh no, I think that was when Simon was referring to his first understanding of drugs when he was back in the police force. And R.I.P. Jim, who's no longer with us sadly, but yeah, he was a big part of the legalised cannabis campaign movement. So that's some of the comments coming in, Jim. But we'll do if you and all the guests just want to sort of sum things up, and then we'll read out the rest of the band name questions, some absolute belters in there, and we'll find out who's won the t-shirt.
Great. There was some great points there. Especially, I was thinking about. I think it was Anita that said about if you put the money back in. So that's the thing. If you are going to legalise it, if you are going to save a fortune in the criminal justice system, it would be a bit pointless if that just went to then go to other election bribes or tax cuts or something like that. You know, so it'd be worth having that conversation. I don't know what you think. You can come in. We'll maybe go to Donna first this time. If that was, I don't know how much Simon might be able to tell us how much is saved in the criminal justice system by decriminalisation, and that money was then available to use in a proper war against drugs. How would you use that money, Donna? Where would you put that money into?
Yeah, to dealing with the underlying stuff. My drug use came for trauma that didn't get recognised, and in prison a lot of the women I met had been through similar traumas, do you know what I mean? And they just get stuck in that criminal justice system. So money for that kind of, and then you've got women in there with wains, that the wains are then going through the childhood trauma, so you're just building it up for the next generation again. So money going into tackling the underlying issues of the drug use, for the problematic drug use.
I mean, that's a big thing about it that always comes up actually when you talk about women in prison. I think it's much more so than men in prison. That the very high percentage of them that have mental health problems, that have got social problems, that probably, excuse me, probably shouldn't, excuse me, I don't know my water. Yeah, the point I was making there, the women in prison who shouldn't actually be in prison, who need help rather than jailed. I don't know if you want to answer that. I'll come back on that, Simon. I mean, just how much of our prison population should actually be in prison?
Low level drug use, in prison. Absolute nonsense. And those resources, we're not just talking about the resources in the system with courts and lawyers and time in court and all the rest of it, and the prison time, which is very expensive as well. It's over £40,000 a year to keep somebody in there. We're talking about the police resources that are used fighting the war on drugs. And that is huge. It's become, when I was a young cop, we had to persuade a gaffer to let us go and do anything about drugs because it was so new. And the old cops from ex-World War II and all that, the old Tuchters, they wouldn't bother with drugs. They weren't interested. They were too busy going looking for drink for themselves, never mind worry about people using drugs. So it was a new breed of policemen coming up back then. But the resources we spend as a country on fighting the drugs war would make your eyes bleed, honest to God. And all of that money could be used, yes, on the education side, but more importantly for that 10% of people who are resorting to drugs. Drugs are the crutch. Drugs are the thing that they're driven to try and ease the pain. And we could do a lot with that pain if we had some resources rather than throwing it. No, we don't throw it down the drain. What we do is give it to criminals. All the money that's being paid for all the drugs in the country is going into the hands of organised crime. You're muted again.
It's a good point, Simon. And I don't know if you want to. I'm okay now, but I don't know if you want to follow on for that. Paul, the idea that we are actually handing the money to the criminals, but in a way, we're just handing them the money. We are subsidising them by providing this kind of whole system that's set up to make sure that they are the people that control drugs.
Well, that's the perversity at the heart of it all. We speak a lot about in the Labour movement about community wealth building, and this is actually the same philosophy. 40 grand a year. I was the MP for Burley, having visited it opened my eyes to a lot of the absurdities in that place. People are actually got learning disabilities. They've got psychological issues. They really shouldn't be in that place. It's dreadful actually. And the prison officers would often look at you and as if you were part of the problem. They were very, very cynical about it. They were like, "Well, what do you expect us to do? We're at the end of our tether here." So it was a very bleak environment to visit. There were some interesting projects going on there. I actually ran a radio station called Barbed Wireless, which I thought was quite funny. But the place is over capacity. It's used as a sump for the rest of the Scottish prison system. There's no way that they can meaningfully engage with any of the, skills-based training or whatever it is in the prison. The vast majority of them are confined to their cells for 23 hours a day. But I think that is a symptom of a society that's failed to grasp this. They've just chucked these people into society. It's too difficult to deal with. Let's bang them in prison and we'll forget about them. And the reality is it's a huge drain on resources. So looking at it a different way, let's examine the reality that the vast majority of drug use, whether it's legal drugs like alcohol and tobacco or illegal drugs like marijuana or heroin, they're often consumed perfectly fine recreationally. People live perfectly normal lives or upstanding citizens, etc. It's a core issue about problematic drug use in communities which have suffered trauma and exploitation. And that's a failure for the whole of the country, because if the individual isn't able to be a productive member of that community or society, then it's a drain on everyone. So the ideal is to get as many of our fellow citizens as possible capable of contributing positive to their communities, and that's the essence of socialism, really, at the end of the day. So by trying to stabilise our lives, we're all better off for that. And also, when we look at the nature of exploitation, whether it's gambling being hoovered up by, there was an article recently about a lady that set up Bet365 who was now a billionaire. It's extraordinary, that kind of wealth can be concentrated in the hands of people who run gambling companies, who run brewing companies, and also the gangsters that are in our midst, driving around in these massive cars around communities. They offer an aspirational, role model in many cases to young kids that are growing up in deprived communities to say, well, that's an obvious route to material improvement. it's ghastly. So if we actually focus on a community wealth building approach, which is about keeping that wealth in communities and stopping it being hoovered out by these exploitative people, whether they're big companies or whether they're gangsters, that would be a lot of the problems solved, because we'd actually be able to hold that wealth in the community and use it for productive purposes, share it more equally, and that would be a great model for us to move forward.
Excellent, Paul. Bet365 Billionaires a big Labour Party donor, by the way. Don't know if you knew that, but I found that last year. But no wonder it was probably a Labour Party deregulated it all. And now, when I was younger and used to get into bookies, for instance, it was very austere. You paid 10% tax on every bet. You were only allowed to bet on racing in Britain. None of it was on the telly, only in the pub. It was you weren't allowed to get a cup of tea or anything like that. There was no slot machines. There was none of this. It was deliberately like a place where you could go in and bet, and there wasn't really much of a kind of social thing. Now they're open from 8 in the morning to 10 at night. They're full of slot machines. There's cartoon, like animated races running every 2 minutes. And it's an absolute nightmare. If you go into a bookies and you have a look at some of the people in there, you can actually see their trauma being played out in front of you while staff take money off them. You can actually see them losing their whole week's wages in seconds. It's disgusting. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with Jim. It was actually, you could see it played out in Springburn Road. If you walk, or Saracen Street, if you walk down that street, you would see it lined with bookies and pubs, but you'd also have like Bright House, which actually collapsed recently. But that kind of told me a story about the banks were all closing in the local community, but they were being bought over and used for bookies. And that just, if you almost visualised it, it's like giant pipes going into the poorest communities in the city and hoovering millions of pounds at the pockets of the poorest communities anyway. And it's like, how do we stop that hemorrhaging? Because that kind of wealth, they're already poor communities, but what little disposable income is available is being sucked out of them and lining the shareholder profits of these various companies. So that in itself tells us a story about the nature of exploitation in our economy and how we can fix it. And it was actually Winston Churchill, I think, believe it or not, who introduced the tote, which was nationalised bookies. So it's interesting how we've regulated these things very tightly in the past, because we recognised they were dangerous if you leave it to a free for all. So there's actually a balance to be struck between criminalisation and just letting it rip, without any form of regulation at all, a free market. So there's a balance there, and I think that's what we really need to aim towards in our society. And whether we've currently got some things that are illegal for whatever reason, certain drugs, and we've got other things that are perfectly legal and they're causing absolute carnage in our midst, suicides, deaths, depression, and they actually compound the problem. So it's like a bit of a fangle that we need to pick. But hopefully we can hit on some of the issues tonight, and it points us to how we can try and improve things.
I'm convinced. You've convinced me. Decriminalise all drugs now.
Regulate them.
I think we're coming to the end.
I'm convinced.
I'm convinced. Sorry. You go, Mark.
No, I'm just saying, I'm convinced. There seems to be no other way. It's not working. Let's get it fixed. Let's get Simon to fix it.
Now you're talking. Jim, if I could just finish on maybe a very...
If you want to say something else.
Yeah, just a very cynical point for you. That cannabis is now sweeping across the states, being legalised and decriminalised across the states, and lots of other countries. Canada are right on their tails. And one of the reasons for it is not because they realise that the war on drugs is a nonsense, and it's not really on drugs at all, it's on us, but because there's huge profits to be made. Huge profits, and our politicians are investing in that. Our big investment houses have got loads of money in it, and there's a massive place down near London under glass being used to cultivate cannabis, because it's a big, huge growing market. So capitalism will determine the legalisation of cannabis in due course.
That's a very true point, and we I suppose when America does stuff first, we tend to copy it. It's like America says it's okay, but it's America that really started the war on drugs that we kind of imitated. So maybe there is some light in the tunnel for at least the decriminalisation of cannabis. Hopefully other things will follow suit. We've got a comment coming in from Empress saying, aye, but trap money's short term. You can't get a mortgage off coke dealing. It's called the trap for a reason. Shouts to Outcast. Indeed, shouts to Outcast. Ali Grant saying, such a civilised discussion. Great cheering by Jim, bringing everybody in, but also by the speakers for not interrupting each other like they would have been on the telly. They've also got a mic thing. We have to mute everyone in between so that there's not an echo going on as well. So there's that as well. But everyone has been very good and civilised. Hopefully we can keep this up for the next 4 weeks. We're going to be here every Thursday. Free Call That Politics. Truth Seeker saying spot on discussion. We got Impress. That's one of the reasons dealers diversify into cash only businesses. This is sunbeds, taxis. I'm not saying the majority of these businesses involved is criminal activities. But I hope not, because that sounds like... they were talking about Outcast. Tam saying, I've been aware of this problem going on 50 years now with no solution as yet. The approach has not changed either. We've got, did the big cannabis farm in Ayrshire get the go-ahead? I've not heard about this. Is there a big... No, we don't know about that. It's not the drugs' fault. That's all that needs to be said. And,
can I just say that I know of several big cannabis farms in Ayrshire? I don't think.
But you're not a grass. You're not a grass.
Go ahead.
We need council runs. We need council run cannabis farms, Jim. You know, it might pay for the parks in Glasgow.
And it's also just to read out. We've got the competition earlier on to win a You Call That Radio T-shirt, which some new entries. Empress is on fire. She said the lot. She said Whitney Houston, Colonel Moss Park in the Dijon 5, or Red Hot Chili Pollock. Jim, do you like any of the ones? Yeah, I've muted you.
I like the Colonel Mustard one. Yeah. And Whitney
Colonel
Houston, because I never thought of that. But I don't think it's a consistent.
It's technically not a band name, so we'll go with Colonel Moss Park in the Dijon 5. And also, Danny said Fergus Lee Scratch Perry. That's a good one. So, Jim, you need to pick a winner.
That's a good one.
That is a good one. That's Danny.
It's Bruce Springburn.
Bruce Springburn.
Bruce Springburn, yeah.
We can only have
Simon's got Talking Hill Heads.
Talking Hill Head. Jim, you need to pick a winner. Pick a winner.
You can only have one. Oh, no. What was it? What was on earlier? What was the one earlier that we liked? The ones that went to the final?
The finals were Royston Orbison by Alan. There was Elvis Paisley by Paul and Edinburgh Westlife by Mary.
I think Royston Orbison gets it. I think Royston Orbison wins.
Congratulations, Alan. Round of applause for Alan.
It's about time Royston gets something.
Congratulations, Alan. You've won the T-shirt. We'll get that to you very soon. And thanks to Donna, Paul, Simon, and just quickly, just go around quickly. Give a plug.
I ask Mark?
Yeah.
Who was Alan? Who?
Alan Rorison. Alan Rorison. What is it you want to know? Anyway, Alan Rorison.
Alan Rorison is a neighbour of mine. He lives round the corner. So it's a bit of a fix, but of course...
It's a fix. Can't even have a competition with controversy. Can't have a raffle with controversy. By the way, shout out to everyone who entered the raffle. There was a big raffle last week, and I've still not announced all the winners. I'll do the raffle admin tomorrow. Everyone who's a patron went in a big raffle, and I know there's a bit of controversy because we've not announced the winners. But you should have been tuned in. We told you who the winners were live, but I'll write them out tomorrow for everybody. Just to sort of wrap things up, I want to go round. We'll go clockwise, anti-clockwise. I don't know. We'll start with Donna. For people to check out, obviously, Homegrown Always Best, Making Recovery Visible. Just a wee plug for your stuff, each guys, before we go. Donna.
Homegrown Always Best, which hasn't been up to much right now, and the weekly radio show on Sunny Govern Radio, Make Recovery Visible.
Nice one, Donna. Simon, tell us about LEAP and how can people help? Hold on, I'll unmute you, mate. I'll unmute you. Tell us about LEAP Scotland and how people can help. And It's a mute. Simon, sorry, it was a mute. Take two. Tell us about LEAP Scotland and how people can get involved.
Okay, we've got a website, we've got a Facebook page, a lot of people, we do events we do chat rooms every week and we do events every month, but we've got a call to action along with Transform just now to a page where people can link on to find out who their local politicians are and send them a standard letter because it's their constituency. And we've built up a whole lot of support, political support, who are signing on. We're also tied in with 70-30 and with ACES and with people like that. It's a partnership, remember, and there are lots of organisations out there looking at it from different aspects, from trauma, from child exploitation, from all sex industry, from all sorts of people that know that prohibition isn't working. And the main thing people can do is get onto our Facebook or webpage or Twitter and just lend their verbal support. That'd be brilliant. And read my book while they're at it.
Sell your book, mate. Tell us about your book. Get a plug in for the book.
It's my memoir, The 10%. It's where all this stemmed from. And it's really, the byline on it is the truth, the whole truth, and something like the truth. So it's a kind of warts and all look at policing from the 70s through to the 90s. It's good fun.
Well, I appreciate it, Simon, because I think it's really important for, like, I'm not going to be able to change many people's opinions by saying, decriminalise drugs, but I think that the job you're doing is very interesting coming from a former policing background. So, keep up the good work. I look forward to checking out the book. Paul, tell us a little bit about the Safe Consumption Room and your Twitter and stuff like that if people want to get in touch.
Yeah, well, the Safe Consumption pilot's been running in the centre of Glasgow since September last year. I've been working with Peter Crichton on that, and the key objective is to prove that it's possible to achieve this change, and some of the political posturing that's been going on is bogus. It was calling that out with actions rather than words. And if you like that, then consider voting for me if you live in Glasgow to send me to the Scottish Parliament. And if you want to look me up on social media, I'm on Paul Sweeney. Just look me up on Facebook or Twitter.
Amazing stuff. Jim, what are you punting? Jim, you went. I think your internet's went down there just now. Also, just got a comment in there. It's too late to enter the competition, but Jackal Tradeston's a good one. And I think it's worth mentioning that Jackal Trades will be playing our first gig since the Barras in 2018 with The Girl Who Cried Wolf, Dope Sick Fly, Loki and Becky Walsh's Steg G. It's immersive TV, which is like a dystopian hell where you can all watch on Zoom and react in real time, and we'll see your little faces as we perform, and all the money, the proceeds goes to Refugee in Sunny Govan, so it's all for a good cause as well. Jim is still here, and we've got Leap saved one of my dearest friends, brilliant organisation, says Mickey Mouse. And Danny's, that's the winner for me. Jackal Tradeston, I think you missed that one, Jim. It is the best one, I think, but it's too late to enter the competition.
Jackal Tradeston, yeah, but it's a bit kind of nepotistic.
It's also a little bit niche because obviously not many people are aware, or not as famous as Whitney Houston, say, or anything like that.
Or Roy Royston.
Rob Royston. Jim, just to wrap things up, could you just tell us about what you call that politics? We're going to be here every Thursday until the Scottish election. Could you tell us what's on next week and what can we expect from that one?
Next week, our guest is Kevin O'Day, poet, playwright, comedian, and our panel is on. And the two confirmed guests so far on the panel are Becky Wallace, who many of you know is a singer-songwriter. She's a lecturer in music at UWS. And Hashim Al-Hassan, who runs the Anti-Racist Educator website and is a teacher based in Glasgow. And there'll be another teacher. We're still sort of haggling joining them. So we were looking at education policies and what we can do better and what should we be doing.
And I think that next week's the one where we've got to start a little bit later because we've got the amazing Ferocious Dog, who are a brilliant band. They're going to be on at 7 o'clock on You Call That Radio's normal show, and then at 8 o'clock You Call That Politics will begin. But it'll be 7 o'clock every week apart from that one. If you can't wait till next week for more stuff, tomorrow night we've got the You Call That Pub Quiz with Zara Janjoa, Paul McCall for Limmy Show, Mandy Clark for Katie's Tunstall and Bombscare, Brian Melrose, Sue Reid, and the return of Frank Foodie. Thank you to Donna, Simon, Paul, and of course Jim tonight. We'll see you tomorrow for the pub quiz.
Thanks, guys.
Nice one. Take care, guys. See you later.
You call that radio?
You call that radio?
What about the people who hated on me?
Right, and then I see the disinfectant that knocks it out in a minute.
That's mad, isn't it?
Is this a Netflix thing?
It's actually a podcast.
What the fuck's a podcast?
You know, it's kind of like a radio show.
Oh, that radio.
Yeah.
Just popped in there.
Right.
And is there a way we can do something like that?
I couldn't help it.
By injection inside or
Yeah, I think so, because I don't think just paint in general, because I think like my poem is in my painting.
No, cut. All right, man. Well done. Good show, mate.
Are we still on?